Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar in the series of requirements engineering about requirement elicitation. My name is Jose Muñoz, and I am currently working as a consultant in Visure Requirements. In the past years, I have been gathering experience in different projects as a system analyst and also as a system engineer, and additionally conducting some trainings about requirement. In the following webinar, I will be sharing those experience and good practices with all of you when working with requirement. Today is our first webinar in the series in which we will be introducing the requirements engineering, and also we go in detail with the first stages, with the first stage of it, which is the elicitation. Other webinars in this series, in those other webinars, we will be covering further stages in the projects in the requirements engineering. But today, it's going to be an introduction to requirements engineering and to the first stage, which is the requirements elicitation. Okay, so take into account that this is going to be a series of webinars. Before starting with the webinar itself, allow me to explain the GoToWebinar interface. All of you are currently mute, but if you have any questions during the webinar, we will have some time for question and answers at the end of the webinar, and you can post any question using the GoToWebinar interface and the question tab that you may have in the right part of your screen. Additionally, we are recording this webinar in order to share it afterward in YouTube, Vimeo, and other channel, other media on the internet. Okay, so with all that being said, we can start with today's webinar. Okay, and the first point is going to be explain the agenda for today. First of all, I'm going to introduce lightly our company, Visure Solutions, just a couple of slides in order to set a background for our company. It will be really fast, I promise. And after that, we will be starting with the first main topic, two main topics for today's webinar. With the first one of today's webinar, which is going to be the requirements engineering. Okay, some of you may have realized that the title of the webinar was requirements management, but now I'm talking about requirements engineering. Well, in fact, a proper title should be requirements engineering more than requirements management, because it's requirements engineering, the one that gather the gathering of the requirements, the different stages, gathering of the requirements, analysis, specification, validation or verification of those requirements, and so on. While management is just a part of the requirements engineering. However, as probably management is a more popular term, a more popular concept, we are using that name. But in fact, this is going to be about requirements engineering. Okay, we will be introducing those concepts, and after that, the next topic in today's webinar is going to be the first stage in the requirements engineering, which is the requirements elicitation. Okay, we will be explaining different methodologies, different techniques for gathering requirements, for eliciting requirements, and finally we will have some time for a summary and some questions and answers. Okay, take into account that in this webinar, if you are watching this as a recorded webinar, I will be skipping the question and answer part for the record. I will just stop recording when we reach to that point. Okay, so as I mentioned, the first part of the webinar, or the first introduction for this webinar, is going to be introduction Visure Solutions, our company. Visure is a company specialized in requirements engineering for both system engineering and software engineering companies. So we bring the best of both worlds, because at the end, requirements are everywhere. They are there when you're building an automotive, when you're building a car, an airplane. Sorry, and they are also there when you are building a software. So we pick the best of both worlds in order to incorporate that in our training courses and also in our tool, because we are manufacturer and distributor of Visure Requirements, our leading requirement solution. However, even we are distributors and manufacturers of our own requirements engineering tool. I won't be talking about any tool in today's webinar because we will be introduction to requirements engineering, just first overview of all the concepts, and also we will be starting today with the elicitation step. For those two things, I don't think that I should be talking about a tool. We will be introducing the tool in further webinars in this series, but not for today. Today I will be just talking about the theoretical concepts and things that we can do with a tool, or we can do with Word and Excel, and with different documents and so on. Okay. Our headquarters are located in San Francisco in the United States of America, and we have got also offices in UK, Spain, and Germany. Here in this slide, you can see a set of our main customers that, as you can also see, comes from both worlds. The system engineering, automotive, rail, aerospace, and the software engineering like finance, telecommunications, and so on. Okay. And as I promised, it's going to be a really light introduction about the company, and after that we'll be starting with our main topic for today, which is going to be introduction the requirements engineering. Okay. First, a little cartoon that if you are working in the requirements world, or you have worked with the requirements, you probably are familiar with. This is especially true for system engineering, but even more true for software engineering. Okay, that sensation of, okay, you start coding, that I'm going to ask the customer what they want. Okay, and that is precisely what why we are going to talk today about requirements engineering, because this shouldn't happen. Okay, but it happens more often than it should. Okay, so let's start by defining, by introduction, what is requirements engineering, and what is a requirement, and after that, what's requirements engineering. We can define a requirement as a condition or a capability which is needed by a user in order to solve a problem or to achieve an objective. Okay, a different definition could be a condition or capability also that must be met or possessed by a system, software, or system to satisfy a contract, standard, specification, or other formally imposed document. Okay, so basically we can say that the requirements are the user needs. It's the way of the user to explain, to share their needs. Okay, and we can gather a couple of interesting concepts from here. Requirements are going to be a contract. Okay, a formal contract with the user, because it's what the user is going to use in order to express his needs, and it's what we are going to somehow formally gather in order to try to solve those needs. So they are going to be a contract, and also they are going to govern the whole dialogue with the user. If the user needs to change something in the product, he's going to change the requirement. If he is going to ask for extra things, he's going to add new requirements to the specification, and so on. So that's what the requirements are going to be. Okay. And also, now that we have stated what is a requirement, we can switch to, what's then the requirements engineering? Well, we have got also a couple of definitions in here. We can define the requirements engineering as the process of defining, documenting, and maintaining the requirements. So everything that is around requirements. Or also we can define it as a discipline that includes all the techniques, methods, and procedures related with the definition and management of user needs related with the system being studied. That could be a system or could be a software. Okay. So from these couple of definitions, we can gather three important things. First of all, it's simple engineering. Okay, this is pretty clear when talking about system engineering. Not so clear maybe when talking about software engineering, but requirements are simply engineering. Requirements engineering is about engineering, so all the analysis, all the process behind it. Okay, it is to know what we are doing and why we are doing. As important as what we are doing, what we must do is to understand why we are doing that. Okay, we will be focusing on these what, why, how questions during different parts of the webinar. I'm going to just put that mark in red, highlight in red, so you remember them, but just take right now that it's know what we are doing and why we are doing that. And we will be going back to these two questions. And finally, it's making sure that we are producing what we are producing, fits the user needs. It's so common, so typical that we run tests at the end of the development. The test pass, the product is perfect, it's fail proof, but we deliver the product and the customer said, this is not what I asked for. This is not exactly what I wanted. Okay, so requirements engineering is about avoiding that. It's about making sure that the product is going to fit the user need. Okay, so a more formal definition for requirements engineering could be this one in here with some clarifications. Okay, so first of all, requirements engineering, RE, it's a set of activities. Okay, and here one point: set of activities, not a stage, not a phase. Okay, so there are different activities that we are going to go back and forward. We will start gathering, then we will be analyzing that, then we will gather again, then we analyze again, then we could move forward to the specification, and so on and so on. So not just a set of stages in a waterfall model. They are activities, okay, that we will be mixing. It's a set of activities concerned with identifying and communicating. As important as the analysis is communicating the requirement. We can have the best specification in the world. Everything is gathered in there. But if we have failed communicating the requirements to the person that need to implement that, we are doomed. Communicating the purpose. Okay, quality means fitness for purpose. We cannot say anything about quality unless we understand the purpose. Okay, the purpose of a system or software and the context. Okay, the designer must know how and where the systems will be included. They need to know the context in which it will be used. Hence, requirements engineering acts as the bridge between the real world needs of users, customers, and other constituencies. Okay, we need to identify the stakeholder, not just the customer and the user. We will be going back to this stakeholder definition. Affected by a software or system, and the capabilities and opportunities, and partially about what is possible, feasibility analysis, afforded by the system software intense technologies. Okay, so we have got here a more formal definition with some clarification at the bottom. Okay, so take into account all of this because that is what we are going to discuss when we talk about requirements engineering. Okay, probably one of the most important principle, or one of the basic principle in the requirements engineering, it's talking about the problem and talking about the solution. Okay, it's always useful, it's always helpful to separate the problem and the solution. Okay, when we talk about the requirement, when we start gathering requirements, usually we are thinking already of what we're going to do to solve the problem that is being exposed to us. Even the user itself, or the stakeholders, in fact, the customers, are thinking about what we are going to do to solve the problem. They have the solution in mind, but it's important to separate the problem, the statement of the problem, and the solution, what we are going to do to solve that problem. Okay, it's important to document the problem statement separately for any design solution, because we can have several solutions for the same problems, and it's going to be helpful to separate those two concepts. This is usually difficult to achieve. Sometimes it's not even possible to specify anything if we don't go a bit into the solution, but as much as possible we must try to separate problem and solution when gathering requirements. Requirements must be about problem and partially about solution also. We will be talking about different levels of requirement afterward. Okay, so with that in mind, requirement engineering, it's about building the right system. basically specify the system that fit to the user's problem. Okay, so it's more problem oriented, not just problem oriented, because in fact part of the requirement specification is the proposed solution. Okay, so it's also going into the solution partially, but it's firstly is problem oriented, and then we will gather some solution for those problems. But we have to start with the problem, and then the software and system engineering, it's building the system right. Okay, now that we have gathered the requirements for the right system, we have to build the system in a proper way. We have to build the right system. Okay, so it's more solution oriented. In this case, software and system engineering is completely solution oriented, while requirements engineering it's problem oriented and partially solution oriented also. Okay, with this in mind, let's just figure out that we have this system life cycle, really simple one. We first of all gather the needs, or we define the needs behind a problem. There is a certain problem that some users, some stakeholders and customers need to solve, so we define those needs, we gather that, and those needs are going to answer to the question why. Okay, why do you need this? This is going to be the problem, and this is going to be the problem domain. The first stage defining these needs is the problem domain, and it's going to answer to the why question. Okay, once we have all that, we can start asking the what we are going to do to solve that problem. So we can start constructing, building an abstract solution, an abstract description for the solution. Okay, and that is going to be, of course, in the solution domain. Once we have got that solution, we somehow agree a solution with the users, with the customers. We can just start going in detail with the how. Okay, so what we are going to do is this, and how we are going to do that exactly, it's the detailed description of the solution. Okay, the solution domain. And finally, once we have all that, we will start coding and implementing everything. Okay, so this is a real simple system lifecycle process. But let's do this. Let's change these names: definition of needs, solution, abstract description, solution detailed description, implementation, for other names, which are going to be user requirements. They're going to answer to the why question and going to be located in the problem domain. Okay, so they must define the problem. Then like we have before, the abstract description of the solution are going to be the system requirements. Okay, they are going to solve the problem expressed in the user requirements. They are going to answer to the what question, what we're going to do to solve the problem. So this is the solution I propose. And how exactly we are going to do that? That's part of the design. Okay, and afterward the implementation. So, and this is really important, requirements are going to answer, depending on the requirements level, to the why question and to the what question, but never to the how question. Requirement shouldn't enter in the details of the how. That's part of the implementation of the design, but not part of the requirements. Okay, so why and what, okay, that's fine, but not how. And this is really important when working with requirement. Okay, this is just a two-level requirements: user requirements, system requirements. But let's say it's the minimum, or usually it's the minimum for separating the problem and the solution. User requirements for the problem and system requirement for the solution. But we may have several levels of requirement after the system requirement, subsystem requirements, component requirement, and so on and so on. Okay, this is partially, it's basically the same, but with additional levels. In the same way, they are going to answer to the why and what, but never to the how. Okay. So, what are the activities that we are going to face when working with requirements? Okay. In the requirements engineering cycle, in the requirements engineering process, we can define 4 main activities. Okay, those activities are going to be the requirements elicitation, okay, which is the process of discovering, reviewing, documenting, and understanding the user needs and the constraints for the system. Okay, so the user need, domain information, existing system information, standards, and so on are going to be the entry point. And based on that, we're going to elicitate requirements. Once we have started with the requirements elicitation, we can move forward to the requirements analysis and negotiation. The requirements analysis is the process of refining the user needs and constraints. Okay, based on what we have gathered, what we have elicited, we can start analyzing that and refining that information. Then we have got the requirement specification, which is going to be the process of documenting the user needs and the constraints clearly and precisely. Okay. Before this, probably we have some drafts, some, let's say, draft documents, but not something formal. So through the documentation, we start gathering something more clearly, more precise. And finally, the verification is going to be the process of ensuring that the system requirements are complete, correct, consistent, and clear. Okay. So those are the 4 activities of the requirements engineering. And if we finalize these 4 activities, we are going to repeat them again and again. And at the end, we will have a set of agreed requirement documented in a formal specification. By the view of this model, we can think about a waterfall process for the requirements. But as we mentioned before, they are activities, not a stage, not a phase. So this probably is going to be a best way for representing the different activities, because as we mentioned before, we are going to repeat them again and again, and we're going to move forward and backward from one activity to another. So this is basically the same graph, but in a different way, in a spiral way. When we start with the elicitation, after that we analyze the requirements, then we document them, then we validate them, and probably we will start, after validating them with the user, we discover that we have missed things, so we start eliciting again, then we analyze again and negotiate the requirement, then we start documenting, and so on and so on. So we are going to repeat this cycle again and again until we have got, let's say that we are happy with the document, with the requirements document that we have got, and the user agree with that document. Okay, so we can repeat these 4 activities as much as needed. Okay. So some observations about the requirements engineering process based on what we have seen today. Well, basically it's not necessarily a sequential process. We don't have to write the problem statement before the solution statement. It's usually the way of working, but it's not always what we are going to do. Rewriting the problem statement can be useful at any stage of the development. So as I mentioned before, we are going to be moving forward and backward for the whole process. Okay. The requirements engineering activities are going to continue through the whole development process, okay, because the statement is going to be imperfect, and as we start designing and developing in the further stages, we will discover things that we are missing, things that we should have specified and we haven't, so we have to go back and specify new things and so on. Basically, the requirements engineering models are just approximation of the world. They will contain inaccuracies and inconsistencies. We may omit some information. Okay, so the more we work on that specification, it's the less is going to be the risk. Okay, but sorry, but we will never have a perfect specification. In fact, perfecting a specification may not be cost effective. Okay, because requirements analysis has a cost. We are not going to start implementing or designing anything until we finish with the requirements. So at some point we have to agree that, okay, this specification is fair enough, it's good enough, so we can start with further stages. Okay, for different projects, of course, the cost benefit balance will be different, so we may want to spend some extra time with the requirement or less time with the requirement. That depends. And also, and this is important, the problem statement should never be treated as fixed. Changes are inevitable, and therefore we must plan for the changes. In fact, the requirement specification that we write should be prepared for accepting changes, because the user is going to ask for this, but probably during the process is going to say, oh, I prefer this in this other way, or maybe we can do this, or maybe we can add these other things, or whatever. So changes are going to be there. So we have to incorporate mechanism. We have to have mechanism for incorporating changes periodically. okay, because that is going to happen. Even if the user doesn't ask for any change, maybe we have to change things because when we reach to the, I don't know, the coding or the implementation, we discover that partially some things that we have specified cannot be achieved or things like that. So we have to change the problem or change not the problem, but also the solution. Okay. So we have to take all these things in mind. So why do we need requirements management? Well, in fact, requirements engineering, okay, to avoid things like this. I distinctly said monorails, you did not. Okay, this is another cartoon. I'm going to use several of these because there is a lot of cartoons about requirements and requirements engineering, and they are really, really good and really accurate with the different requirement situations. Okay, so now that we have defined that we have 4 stages, elicitation, analysis, specification validation, or documentation validation. Let's start with the first stage. Sorry, not a stage, as I mentioned, first activity, which is the requirement elicitation that we have defined as the process of discovering, reviewing, documenting, and understanding the user needs and the constraints for the system that we must specify, that we must develop afterward. The first thing here is that you can see requirements elicitation. Why I'm using the word elicitation instead of gathering? Well, requirements gathering is fine. We can say that, but usually if you say gathering, it's like the requirements are there. You go pick them, and you can just put them into a document. It's never so easy. The requirements elicitation, the requirements gathering, let's say, it's a complex process. You have to meet with the different users, meet with different, interview with them. You have to, it's not as easy as going there and picking the requirement. You have to struggle for them. You have to fight for them. So another word must be used instead of gathering. So elicitation is a good word for that because it requires some extra effort, not just go and pick the requirements. Okay. But if you see somewhere requirements gathering, it's exactly the same stage. So what is the requirements elicitation? Okay, and this is a really good cartoon from Dilbert explaining about that also. In fact, the requirements elicitation seems pretty simple, right? You ask the customer or the user and any other person that may be interested, what are the objectives for the system or the product? What is to be accomplished, how the system or product fits into the needs of business, and finally, how the system or product is to be used on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so you just ask for that and get some answers. Well, it's not that simple. In fact, it's very, very hard. Okay, and why is that that hard? Well, we will be explaining that. First of all, some definitions for the requirements elicitation. Okay, we have already defined that, but let's start with some extra definitions. Well, one of it is the process of discovering the requirements for a system by communicating with customers, system users, and others who have a stake in the system development. Okay, and it's important here the stake part. Okay, we haven't defined that yet. We haven't mentioned that, but we are not going to use the word customer or the word user. We will be using the word stakeholder, and I will be explaining that afterward. Gather, as I mentioned before, as in requirements gathering or capture, seemed a bit inaccurate. It's not so easy as going and picking the requirements. So that's why we are using the word elicitation. And this is a really good quote for Robert McCloskey, and the State Department spoken. It's a tribute to him. That he said, I know that you believe that you understood what you think I said, but I am not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And this one explained pretty well the situation with the requirements. Okay, usually we misunderstand what we are hearing, but sorry, not just that, but the person that is speaking has something in mind, and he is misunderstanding himself and saying something that is probably not what he has in mind. And what we are doing is understanding another thing that is not what we are trying to say. So at the end, we finish with a specification that probably is not fitting, not matching with what the user is asking for. So that has to be taken into account during the elicitation process. Okay. So, what are the elicitation steps in this elicitation activity part of the requirements engineering? Well, mainly 4 activities. In fact, 3 activities, and at the end we produce a document. The 3 activities are well, first, not exactly first, because the 2 first can be exchanged, the other can be exchanged. We have to identify the source of information or requirements, okay, all the authorized source of requirements, and as part of this, we will be identifying the stakeholders. And we must also start by setting the project scope or define the system boundaries. Those 2 activities must be performed at the beginning. It really doesn't matter if I first identify the sources of the information, or first we set the scope of the project. Okay, but we have to do those 2 first. After we have done those 2, we can go to the third one, which is in fact the third one. It doesn't matter if we identify sources first or we set the project scope first, but the next one must be accomplished after doing the two others, and that is going to be state or select the appropriate techniques that we are going to use for each source of information, for gathering, for extracting requirements. Okay, so with the scope in mind and with the different sources identified, we can just gather requirements with different techniques. But first, we have to define the system boundaries and identify the source of information. And once we have finished applying the different techniques, we are ready for producing a first document. Well, document, it's a big word here. It's going to be a draft. It's mainly contain notes and user requirements, really high-level requirements, and not properly written requirements. Of course, they're going to be incomplete, they're going to be inconsistent, they're going to be disorganized, but we have to start somewhere. Okay, so that is going to be our first draft for a future requirements document. Okay, but take into account that it's going to be really messy, but that's the way it is. After that, we will be analyzing those and we will be start getting something more formal. But the first draft is going to be a nightmare. Okay. So when identifying the source of requirements, we have several sources of authorized sources of requirements. They are going to be stakeholders. And just keep that word in your mind, stakeholder. I will be explaining that in the next slide. Okay. Other sources of requirements are going to be existing systems. Okay. If we already have a system, that's going to be a great source of information, because we can see exactly what is working fine, what is working not so fine, what is not working in the current system, and that is going to be sources of requirements. Existing documentation. Maybe the system we're going to build is something that's going to automatize a process, something that is currently being doing manually. So we can just analyze the documentation for supporting that and just create a system that is going to support all that. Competitors on other existing or similar system, that is also a great source of requirements. Okay, let's analyze why this other product is so good in the market. What they are doing so great? So let's put those things into our product, and also some extra things to add some more value. Interfaces with third systems. Okay, we have to analyze what with the system have to communicate with other systems, and that is going to be also a source of requirements. Laws and standards that we must meet into our system are also a source of requirement. If we are building a software and we have to accomplish with some data protection, or we have to meet some data protection laws, that must be taken into account when the requirements are being gathered. Some company policies. Okay, maybe my policies. Another software example, but again, this is for both software and system. Another software example, this system that we are going to develop for this banking company, according to their company policies, every software that they install must be web-based. So that is a huge source of requirement, because the system that we are going to build is going to be web-based. So we have to take that into account. Okay, and so on and so on. So extra source of requirement. Probably the most important or the most common one are the stakeholder. Okay, so what's a stakeholder? What's the meaning of a stakeholder? What's a user? Okay, why I'm not using the word user? Well, the user are probably one of the main stakeholders. That's, of course, that's completely true, but they are not the only one. Okay, let's say that the user is a subset into the set of stakeholders. Users are important, but not the only one to be taken into account. We are thinking about users, the people that are going to use the system, but they are not the only one that are going to give me requirements about my system. And this is a really good example, the one I call the nightclub stakeholder example. Okay, let's figure out, let's imagine that we are going to build a new nightclub and it's going to be super cool. It's going to be the new sensation for the night. Okay, so in order to build our nightclub, which is going to be our system, we are going to ask potential customer, okay, the kind of people that we want to bring into our club. But not just them. We are going to also ask the waitress, okay, exactly how you're going to work here, and based on that, I'm going to put the bottles in here or whatever, the alcohol in here or whatever. We're going to ask the DJs exactly how you're going to perform your job, so we can put you in a proper place or whatever. We're going to ask everyone, okay? And we are going to gather requirements. Everyone that is going to be a user or is going to be an employee in my nightclub is going to be going to be giving me requirements. Okay, that's great. I open my club and it's amazing. It's sensational. Everyone wants to be there. But after a couple of days, maybe this old man living just above my club that I didn't take into account when gathering requirement is going to call to the police one night after another because he's not able to sleep because I didn't take into account maybe some these old men that we are making too much noise, and maybe at the end I have to close my nightclub because the police is going to be coming night after night in order to ask me to close. So this is a great example of a stakeholder which is not a user of the system. Probably he is not going to be in my nightclub ever, but he has some interest in my system. Okay, so based on that, we can define a stakeholder as individuals or organizations who stand to gain or lose from the success or failure of a system. Okay, this is a great definition because not only the people who want the system to be a success must be taken into account. Also, the person that are going to be opposing the system must be taken into account. Okay, so with this in mind, important thing about the stakeholder is that identifying all of them uh, in the project is basic for the success of this activity, of this requirements elicitation. Okay, so then based on that, what are going to be or who are going to be the stakeholders from my system? Well, this is just an incomplete list of stakeholders, but we can start gathering some names. For example, the client or customer, the person who is paying for the development of the system, it's going to be a stakeholder. Okay, of course, he has a final word on what we will be producing. Okay, and he has some important constraint, the money. Okay, depending on the budget, we can do this or this other thing. Okay, another stakeholder, it's going to be the user. Okay, of the current system and of the future system that we are going to produce, and they are going to be a huge source of requirement. They are going to be the expert on the current system. They can tell me exactly what is malfunctioning in the current one, what they want in the future one. They are expert in the competitors. They may have a special need that they have to take into account about the usability, training, maybe discapacities, whatever. So we have to take all of them into account. The domain expert, okay, as I mentioned before, maybe the system we are building is something for automatize uh, some task that someone is currently doing manually, and the system is going to automatize them. So that one doing those manually is going to be a great source of requirement because it's the domain expert. Okay, for example, and inspectors, yeah, because we have to meet with some rules, with some laws, things like that. Um, really related with that, the lawyers, also a source of requirements. Also, experts of system that must interact with the system that I'm going to build, because they are going to give me requirements in order to integrate those two systems. Usability expert are going to give me also some hints when building my system, okay, making it more user-friendly and things like that. As I mentioned before, this is just an incomplete list of stakeholders. Okay, there are much more stakeholders, and depending on the organization, you may have already identified some stakeholders that you are always using in your company. But the important thing here is, and this is valid for mostly all the stages in the requirement, is building checklist. Okay, we must or we should build a checklist with the usual suspect, let's say, okay, the usual sources of requirements. We may have stakeholders, we may have existing system, we may have whatever. What it's a good recommendation to have a list of usual suspect for this, and also inside of each one of those, for example, inside of the stakeholder, gather a list like this with who are the domain expert or the inspector, the lawyers, in order to be sure that we are taking all of them into account when gathering requirement. Maybe some of them are not going to give me any requirement, but it's important to take them into account. And okay, I'm not going to gather any requirement from them, but I have to expressly say that I'm not going to gather requirement. It's more important to do that to forget someone. Okay, so in the requirements engineering process, building checklists is a great example. Okay, sorry, a great example. It's a great practice. Regarding the stakeholders, some considerations. Usually, the stakeholders are busy. Okay, they have other priorities than you, and they are rarely completely disconnect from the daily routine and the daily basic. Well, they say their participation in this process of elicitation as a supplementary task. Usually, for example, if it's a user, the stakeholder that you're going to interview or whatever, you go there and he's already working with the old system, and you're going to ask him about the requirements for the new system. He probably is working right now in his daily basic, and he's seeing this as probably as a maybe not a waste of time, as a waste of time, or maybe as a waste of time, but he has to do other things. So we have to take that into account, and maybe he's not so open to participate or whatever. So to avoid this, we must have the support and commitment of their manager, okay, especially their managers, because they have to tell them, okay, in the next 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, spend some time with these guys, and this other thing that you were doing can wait for 2 or 3 more hours. Okay, this is in a perfect world, probably it's going to tell them, yeah, speak with them, but keep the deadline for this. But we have to try. Okay, we must have the manager support, and also we must avoid being perceived as a threat, and that's something that usually happens because people think that they may lose of their jobs if we are going to build a system that is going to replicate their current job. They are going to lose autonomy or power or privilege because information is power, and the way of doing this, which is working right now, they are the expert on doing that, and they are not willing to share that knowledge so a new system can do what they are doing right now. So those kind of things happen. Okay, and that's always difficult, and it's something that must be handled with care. Okay. So once we have identified the stakeholder, all the sources of requirements, including the stakeholders, or even doing before that, as I mentioned before, the first and second step can be exchanged easily. We must set the project scope, or just set the system boundaries. Okay. Which is that basically you should determine which of the requirements are system requirements and which of the requirements should be outside of the scope of the system. Okay, because sometimes we start defining the the boundaries, well, not the boundaries, but the requirements of my system, and we discovered that but the system is going to do so much more things that the customer asked for, because we start asking the user, and they ask for more and more and more things, but maybe that's not the purpose of the system. So we must start by defining the boundaries for my system. Okay. Setting the scope helps ensuring that all the requirements refer to the same system. Okay, this is a good example. Also, I have got. It happens to me that we have to build this system that was for managing suppliers for a company. It's a software system, and part of the requirement is that the system must send emails automatically to the suppliers. Okay, so you can just ask for things or whatever. So the system must send email, but they also ask for that those emails were sent by the emailing application of the company. Okay, so part of the boundaries definition is stating the system is going to send the email by itself, or the system is going to communicate with a third-party system, which is going to be the one sending the email, and the system just needs to send, this is what I want you to send to this person, and that's it. See, it could seems that they are close, that they are related, but they are two completely different things, and the scope of my system is going to be completely different. If my system is going to send the email by itself, or if my system is going to communicate with a third-party system, which is going to be the one sending those emails. Okay. So, three basic activities when identifying the scope, which are identify the functionalities of the system, identify the actors, which are going to be the external entities that are going to communicate with my system, not necessarily persons or people. An actor could be a third-party system, as I mentioned before, and also identify the information that the actors are going to exchange with my system and with each functionality offered by my system. Okay. When possible, in order to set the scope, we recommend using some kind of diagrams. Okay. And for this, there is a couple of diagrams that the system and software engineering world are offering, which are the use case diagram and the DFD. Okay, there are different types of diagrams with different covering different types of parts. Okay, basically the use case focus more in the functionality, so in the future. Yes, not the future. Sorry, in the features. Okay, and it's more dynamic than a DFD. However, there is no sequence in the diagram itself. If we afterward explain those use cases by different sequence diagrams and we explain them with different scenarios, that will represent sequence. But in the diagram itself, there is no sequence. Okay, take that into account. And the DFD focus more in the information exchange, more in that than in the features offered by the system, and it's of course more static. So which one should I use? Whatever you feel more comfortable with, and whichever is going to be understood by everyone that needs to be working with the requirements. Okay, and probably depending on the project, you will be using one or another. But we always recommend using some kind of diagram for setting the scope. If not possible, well, you can set the scope just by writing down the boundaries of your system, but somehow you have to gather all that. Okay. So, what are the elicitation tasks? So, during the elicitation, we must confirm the viability of the project. Is it worth it? We should be doing this, feasibility analysis and so on. We must understand the problem from the perspective of each stakeholder, and this is important, okay, because not everyone is going to be the same for the system. Not everyone is going to have the same interest. Okay, we must extract the essence of stakeholder requirements. We must also try to invent better ways to do the work of the users, trying to be innovative. Okay, we can use our previous knowledge in different systems in order to give more info to the user. So, oh, we can do this in this other way, or we can propose things. That is going to be during the elicitation. Okay, after the elicitation or following the elicitation, we must analyze the result in order to understand the obtained information. We must negotiate a set of requirements that is acceptable by all the stakeholders and establish priorities on those requirements. And we must record the results in the requirement specification. And take into account that the elicitation is an incremental process that we will be repeating as much as necessary. Okay, so those tasks are going to be executed in the whole elicitation process. We have mentioned that there are three main steps in the elicitation, apart from writing down the document, which are going to be setting the boundaries on the system, identify the sources of requirement, and the third one, once we have completed the first two, are going to be identifying the different elicitation techniques that we are going to apply to each source of requirement, and of course, applying them. Okay, so basically we must select an appropriate set of technique for each source of requirements. Based on what? Well, based on the source, based on the system that we are going to develop, and so on and so on. Not all techniques apply to all these scenarios. Okay, for example, the brainstorming. I haven't explained it yet, but probably most of you will have in mind what's a brainstorm. Okay, so probably if we are going to develop, I don't know, a supplier management system or a provider management system, we're not going to brainstorm anything because let's say that everything is already invented there or something like that. But if we are working in Apple or in Google or something like that, probably these guys are brainstorming the whole day. Okay, because they are innovating day after day with new product, new projects, new things that are not in the market yet. So they are just gathering ideas, crazy ideas maybe, but gathering new things. Okay, so for this kind of developments, for this kind of systems, brainstorming is fine. But maybe for building us a portal, a web portal, we don't need to be so innovative, so we can skip the brainstorming. Yeah, basically, depending on what we are, the system, depending on the sources, we will be using some techniques. Okay. Some example of techniques, and take into account that this is just a short list of techniques. Well, we may use multiple point of views called preview. We may use interviews, which is probably the most common techniques, questionnaires, brainstorming, storyboards, business models, prototyping, role games, analysis of systems, of existing system, and so on and so on. I have marked in red three here: the interviews, prototyping, and the analysis of existing system, with the intention of analyze or go more in detail with these three techniques. But this is just a 1 hour webinar, and probably I will be running out of time. So I will be focusing only in the interviews, and I will be left in the prototyping and the analysis of existing system for the future, because I won't have time for going in detail with each of those techniques. Okay. So as I was mentioning, each technique, sorry, is going to be helpful for one thing, and it's going to be some pluses and some minus, some merits and some flags. Okay, it's going to have good points and things in favor, things against. So, for example, I don't know, the questionnaires. Okay, plus you can write down a questionnaire that is going to be answered by the different stakeholders. So you are going to use that for gathering requirement. So it's really easy, really simple, and you're going to reach a lot of people. Okay, but what are the problems with this? Well, most of them are not going to answer the questionnaire. So the response rate is going to be probably low. The answers are not going to be exactly what you wanted, because you are not there to explain the questions. It's not the same as an interview. It's not going to replace an interview ever. Okay, so pluses and minuses. The interview, for example, well, the interview, it's great. It's amazing technique. Okay, the interviewer can guide the interviewee. You can encourage him to give you answer. You can have immediate feedback. You ask for something, he give you an answer, and you can ask back. Okay, so this is the way you do this. Yeah, you have got it right, or no, you haven't got it right, whatever. But the problem is it's time consuming. You need a lot of time to reach a lot of people, and that's money at the end. And probably you won't be able to interview as many person as you would like. Okay, so the important thing to take into account here is that each technique is going to have some points in favor, some good points, and some points against. Okay, so we have to take that into account when considering which technique to apply to which stakeholders or to which requirement sources. And I'm going to go in detail with the interview, which is probably the most common technique. Okay, as is stated here, it is recommended to be used to mix it with other techniques. Okay, usually the interview is a great technique, but it's possible to mix that with, I don't know, with use cases or with business cases in order to guide the interview, or maybe with the preview technique, which is a different technique based on gathering requirements from each point of view and then mix them and analyze them together. That is going to be a great if we use that along with the interview, of course. Okay. The interviews differ from the questionnaires, okay, which of course don't replace the interview, okay, because we have immediate feedback in the interview. We have a way to communicate directly with the customer, with the user, with the stakeholder. So it's not going to replace a questionnaire ever. It is always helpful and recommended to set an agenda before the interview. So for today's interview, we are going to discuss this, and this other point. Maybe the system is huge and we have to focus into one part of it for this person or for this day, whatever, but we have to set an agenda. A bad thing for the interview, or a thing to take into account, is that it's require great communication skills, and not everyone is as good as everyone doing interviews. Okay, in fact, there are training courses for interviews, and there are many different roles that can be performing or not performing so well an interview. Okay, and it's always recommended to interview with as many stakeholders as possible, but yeah, always the time and the money are always a constraining here. 3 main steps when preparing or when doing the interview technique. First one, planning and preparation. Second one, the interview, and then the consolidation of the information and follow-up. Okay, so first one, planning and preparation. We have to set the goals and objectives from the interview before going to the interview, of course. Get some background knowledge of the subject in order to conduct an effective interview, and we should have a first before going to the interview, we must understand a bit, try to understand the problem, the domain, the vocabulary that the interviewer is going to use, so he's going to feel more comfortable, and so on. We have to prepare the question in advance by topic, but also take into account that during the interview itself, new question may arise, and we may somehow left our original question aside, but eventually we have to go back. We have to take that into account. And also, organize the environment. Who is going to take the notes? They're going to be manually taken by audio, whatever. During the interview session, we have to make the interview comfortable and confident. We have to be polite, and we have to discuss with him and talk everything with him. We have to adjust to the interview. We have our goals, of course. We have to be persistent, but we have to be flexible. If he's telling us things that we may find not interesting, we have to be careful on the way of explaining this, and also take into account that they may seem not interesting, but they are. Okay. It's always helpful also to interview several people at once to create synergies. Okay. Sometimes you ask someone something, and there is more people in the room, and he gives you an answer, but other person is going to add more information. Yeah, that's right, but also remember that. Oh, yeah, you're right. Whatever. Okay, but this has to be done as always with care, because There is the risk that some persons are more shy and they try to not give you answers and so on, because there is more people, so you're really focusing on them. So don't forget everything. Take carefully with that, but always try to use several people. And always ask question and check for the answers. Okay, so you ask, so how are you doing this process? Well, we do A and then we do B. Oh, so you do first A and then you do B. Yes, that's it. Or no, you get it wrong. Whatever. It's one of the good points of the interview is that you have immediate feedback, so use it. And finally, the first step for the interviews is the consolidation of information and the follow-up. Okay, we have to revise and complete the note of the interview as soon as possible, because the longer, the easier to forget something. Okay, identify inconsistencies and address them in follow-up interviews. Maybe this user tell you this and this user tell you that, and those are not compatible. So we have to somehow discuss that. We must save copies, an example of all the material that we have acquired, and we must be precise. We are learning, so we have to pay attention to terminology. We have to use interview terminology, identify synonyms, create a glossary of terms, and so on. And finally, of course, thanks all the participants for their time. Of course, there are some risks, some mistakes that we have to try to skip when conducting an interview, which is, first of all, not interviewing all the right people. Okay, there are different points of view. We must try not to forget any of them. So that's why mixing the interview with different techniques like the preview, it's a good idea. We can also make this mistake of asking direct questions too early, because we understand the problem and we already have a solution in our minds. But that is super dangerous. We have to be really problem-oriented, not solution-oriented. We shouldn't guide the user to our solution. He must explain the problem and so on, and then we came up with a solution, but not guide them to that. Interviewing one at a time instead of in a small group, it's always more helpful to interview in small groups. Creates synergies, reduces spotlight of individuals. Maybe separate person cannot think of everything. That's always great. And also assuming that the state's needs are exactly correct. They are not always correct. Okay, that's another thing for having several people at once. And a good quote about all these, it's this one from Steve Jobs, which is, it's really hard to design product because a lot of time people don't know what they want until you show it to them. Okay, and that is completely true also for the requirements elicitation. Okay, they think that they know what they want, but until you show them, they won't be knowing that is what I want or that is not what I want. Okay, so that happens sometimes, and it's a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I will like to go through other techniques like analyzing the existing systems or the prototyping. Okay, but we are running out of time, so I'm going to jump to the summary and the conclusions. And as I mentioned before, the question and answer session, I won't be recording that. So if you are watching this in YouTube or any other channel, sorry, but there is no question and answer in this video. So basically, what we have learned today, well, we have learned about the requirements and the requirements engineering specifically, and the 4 activities that create the requirements engineering: the elicitation, the analysis, the documentation, and the validation. Okay, we have talked today specifically about the elicitation, but in future webinars after the summer, we will be focusing on the different stages, including the analysis, the documentation, and the validation. Okay. Sorry, once again, I say stages. They are not stages, they are activities. Okay. Why? Because it's not a waterfall model. You go backward and forward. It's not a stage, it's an activity. And we have also discovered about the elicitation, which is problem-oriented and not solution-oriented. This is super important. We are gathering the needs, we are gathering what the user needs. Okay, and after that we can propose a solution. But don't force the solution too early. Okay. The elicitation is about discovering the boundaries of the right system to build. Okay. We have to discover exactly what the system is going to do, what is going to be outside of the system, and the right system. Okay, this is really important. It's about collaborative work between stakeholder and requirements engineers. Okay, we have defined the stakeholder, everything that has something to say about the system, that have something to gain or to lose by the system success or the system failure. It's about finding the requirement and its sources. Okay, we have, along with each requirement, we must identify the source of that requirement. We must trace that requirement to the source, because if at any point we have some problem with this requirement, this is incompatible with this one, or we cannot implement this requirement because the technology is not good enough for this, we can go back to the source and analyze that and check that with that source. It's about making explicit what is implicit. This happens a lot with the requirement. Oh yeah, of course, you don't implement this in the product. You didn't tell me about that. Of course I didn't, but that was there. It's obvious. No, it's not, because it wasn't explicit. So it's about making explicit what is implicit. And also we have different techniques that we can use for the different purposes. Interviews, brainstorming, prototyping, depending on the users and depending on the system, we will be using one or other technique. This is all for today's webinar. Thank you very much, all of you, for your attention. As I mentioned before, take into account that this is the first webinar in our requirements engineering series of webinars, in which we have covered requirements engineering and requirements elicitation, the first stage. The first step or the first activity. In future webinars, in further webinars, we will be covering further parts of the requirements engineering process. Okay, so please stay tuned to our webpage, www.visuresolution.com, in order to see when we will be hosting the next webinar of the series. Now, I would like to thank all of you for your attention and just wish you a good day, a happy day. Goodbye.